The Ark, Part 3. Lana swept around the armory, and her sight fell on the Desert Eagle. It was the most giant gun on the deck. A gun with the charisma of a Hollywood movie star who he was by right, because no self-respecting action ever passed him by, so Lana gifted him with such a sensual stare that Mark even felt jealous to that gun. Desert Eagle, please. Mark ordered for the representative behind the counter and turned to Lana again. You can pick something else. Now's your turn, Lana answered gratefully. AR-15, please, said Mark, and the representative took an assault rifle with a telescopic sight of the wall. Then Lana picked herself a Colt 1911, beautiful, with a shimmering metal scorpion on the handle. And Mark added a Beretta. The man brought cartridge boxes and a pair of shooting headphones, put it all in a plastic basket, and gave a briefing, explaining the basic safety rules and the specifics of using each firearm. Down the stairs, Mark and Lana entered the shooting gallery. The pops of gunshots, which seemed like innocently bursting balloons in the lobby, thundered terribly in the gun range. The smoke was everywhere and smelled of a burned gunpowder. Lana shuddered and clipped on her headphones with the grace of a doe. It was the first time she'd ever been in a shooting range. Mark walked over the firing position, put the basket on the table, and began to load the magazines. Lana picked up her Desert Eagle, removed the magazine, and tried to insert a round, but her efforts were vain. The spring was very tight, and shells totally refused to go to the case. Mark offered his help. Desert Eagle is a toy as beautiful as useless, which makes a temptation to shoot with it even more. At last, routine was over. Lana took her beautiful Colt, stood in a stance, and slightly tilted her body forward for two-handed shooting. Mark was slightly bothered. When you shoot for the first time, accident can happen. Guns recoil throw it sideways. Sometimes it can even arrive into the forehead. Especially the Desert Eagle. Or the thumb can be injured by the slide if not placed on the grip. No need to freak Lana out with such details, so it was crucial to check everything very thoroughly. Making sure that everything was safe, Mark gave a thumb up and, focusing on aiming Lana, fired the first shot of her life. It was a crucial moment because no one following shot would ever be as frightening as first. Lana fired out the whole magazine of her Colt, finally calmed down, and being on a roll, ready to test the biggest pistol of the time. Mark grandly handed her the Desert Eagle, and when Lana took it in her hands, she instantly felt all its crushing weight. The cannon weighed 2 kilograms. Moreover, it had a handle so thick that Lana's modest palm was not enough to grip. She looked at Mark confused. Such a huge gun, even to him, would be better to hold with both hands, so the only way to buck Lana up was to wrap both hands around that gun, along with her. Well, as philosopher Bakhtiar Mamedov said, better to do it than regret once than not to do it and then regret all the life. But the real problem was in the trigger of that crazy gun. It was so tight that Lana didn't have much chance to push it through. The shot has ran out, and Mark realized that from Desert Eagle every shot is frightening as the first. After firing all the rounds, Shooter left the fumes of the gun club and went outside to enjoy fresh air and evening silence. Next time, I'll shoot a revolver, Lana said enthusiastically and added. Want me like in Western, hitting the pin to release the entire clip from scratch and then blow the smoke. That would be cool. The mine is not to ricochet the visitors around. How long the cowboy practices require it. I'm not rushing anywhere, Lana continued. A student has all the night ahead, Mark recalled an old student saying. The other hand, you'll be a good mother. You could protect your children. Nah, I'm afraid it's not the time to be a mother yet. I gotta get to grips with the feather first. That's where the years of cowboy practice really will be needed. Lana thoughtfully peered into the prospect of dusk and habitually reached into her purse for cigarettes, but then stopped. I remembered that she quit. Well, if anyone has no equals when it comes to shooting, it is you. So, you're 100% ready for the family front? Yes, thank you. But the family front is only 50%. And what about, I beg your pardon, family back? The economic flank is not worked out at all. Oh, really? It won't take you long to fix it. What makes you so sure? Well, you're gonna be a prospector, aren't you? You will find the treasure. Oh, yeah, that's the only hope. The silence of deserted streets, marred by strokes of warm window light and street lamps, lulled with the night's tranquility. Mark saw Lana off, and they were almost to her house. The residue of gunpowder smoke still lingered in clothing, and persistently reminded of the gun club. I think I figured out why the Desert Eagle was named that way. Really? Every shot the bird tries to break free, right out of the hands. No worries. I'll give it to you for your birthday, and you can tame it. It would be nice to tame you first yourself so you can help me hold him down. Oh, you unveiled all my plans. Oh, how devious. Lana turned to Mark, wrapped him with her arms, and gently kissed. Time sped up even more, and half of the year flashed by in a bright sequence of events and memories. Lana didn't smoke anymore, but with the enviable frequency, she exploited her new habit now to pass through the doors marked unauthorized person prohibited. Inspiration for such adventures was giving her journalist practice. It's not always possible to get an interview with an exclusive respondent. Usually, well-known creative people are very busy and don't want to waste their precious time on numerous reporters. However, if you catch them on worksite, you can quite to talk. But how does a non-credit journalist get into the filming pavilions with dressing rooms for artists and singers when they're not performing but rehearsing? Here's where Mark's method reveals all its precious practical potential. As a result, they went around dozens of various theater and music venues, film pavilions, private shows, and expositions, hunting down interesting people for interviews, some of whom were celebrities. By the way, one feature of this approach was that none of workers present ever questioned who they were. Well, if a person is here on a working time, then it means he's on the job. So, no matter how prominent was artist, you could start to chat with him on equal foot as a colleague. Lana became aware of the thing that could only be heard in narrow professional circles. Sure, it required extreme care and caution, but Lana herself could teach anybody to that. Once, she brought Mark to the gun club dressed in leather pants and cossacks. A giant leather holster hung from a belt, and cowboy fedora crowned her head. She picked up a Colt Peacemaker 1973 revolver and instantly unloaded a full clip into the target, continually rifling the trigger with a free hand. Then, In the best tradition of Hollywood Western, she blew the smoke, twisted a revolver on the trigger guard around her finger, and put it back in a holster. Curtain. Yes, it was a spectacular performance. Visitors even asked for encore, turning on the cameras on the phone. Mark looked both times, never blinked. Moreover, she looked just killing both literally and figuratively. The frayed leather pants tightly fitting her hip line, the slim cowboy shirt drawing her burning silhouette against the target in languid smokes, and the massive holster dangling from a white strap across the waist. It was all so expressive that literally screamed with all its appearance. God created all men different, and cold made it outlined. Yeah, the gun club is conquered. Mark pondered. Better raise the heat or the girl gets bored. But where to go next? To the fight club? In fact, such Lana's performance for Mark was quite explainable. She is witty and loves to fool around. And also, of course, she wanted to impress him. This last assumption especially warmed Mark's soul, though learn how to shoot a revolver like that. How much work must you put in? In fact, for Lana this game was much more interesting. It might catch Mark's eye too, if he just knew himself as well as Lana saw him. First, because some things are better seen from outside. And second, because some things are better seen with woman's eye. Women's and men's intuitions are different. Men are easier at interpreting details, and women are easier at interpreting summaries. Suppose there's a man walking. He has certain gait, hairstyle, clothes, mood, and so on. The male eye will pick out his profession, and the female eye will pick out the state of him. Because a man loves analyzing specific details, and woman loves generalizing result of a big data processing. The big data in our case are emotions, represented by a giant number of micro movements, gait, breathing, gestures, etc. To realize and analyze it all logically very inefficient, so the processing of this enormous flow proceeds subconsciously, and accordingly there's no need to learn it. But if you bring your head to it, you can even do wonders. Yeah. So Lana had no need to impress, to be liked. He liked her very much anyway, and it was obvious to her. And she herself was absolutely amazed. But other than that, she loved him to use as a dope. She knew how to splash on the coal to make it hiss and give her a bunch of hot steam. It becomes possible if there's a chemistry. So the performance Lana showed up on the range intended an attempt to shake his belief that he wanted to control himself and their relationships. Was it possible at all or not? Nobody knows. But for sure, this attraction provided a lot of impressions for both of them. She loved to feel that he confessed her supreme. And more, she loved to feel that he liked it himself, too. Although Mark didn't realize it at full. He thought of himself as a strong and determined guy with a backbone inside. He preferred to think that he kept himself under control, and no one could manipulate him. Exactly because of and in spite of this intention, he never allowed himself to realize that, in fact, he liked being soft. And denying this preference, he becomes even more exposed because he does not see how seductive a taste of this suppressed desire is seeping through him. It was more and more difficult for Lana to restrain herself every once in a while from pushing this door in Mark's unconscious with the explicit inscription, "Unauthorized person prohibited." Perhaps it wasn't quite fair to him as a friend, which he could be called unmarried. On the other hand, if they are friends, then she is not unauthorized. Anyway, he wasn't doing it only for herself, but for him as well. So what if he doesn't realize? And can he try telling that he's not a rock? That he is in fact a soft, juicy orange. And Lana struggles more and more to resist the temptation to crush him with both of her hands, so he bursts and splutters in all directions from the pleasure of being crushed by her. All these feelings and thoughts were mixing and conflicting with each other. Seemed that they were pulling in the opposite directions, and it was completely not clear at all. What does she want? To be his friend is to protect his sovereignty. To be his lover is to violate it. How, with such an opposite idea, you can combine the love and friendship? The question is rhetorical. Once at an engagement party for her friend, Lana got a little carried away with the champagne. For all around it was clear Lana was Eva's closest friend. They met in school and were such good friends that even all their parents became the friends. Eva was a dancer and studied at the choreographic school. That's where she found her pair. They matched each other very well, and to the point they looked just like a cover model. In addition, the very beginning of the party was announced by a very hot tango in their own performance. What could be more romantic? By the way, it was right this Eva who introduced Lana to Mark on the very first day they met. As the evening wore on, the crowd scattered around the garden. Scorpions Still Loving You played, and Mark with Lana slowly danced on the court. She's happy, Lana said. They both to me, Mark confirmed. They danced just great. Yes, Mark agreed thoughtfully. They're very good dancers, insisted Lana. And we are not very good dancers, Mark asserted his question. And we are not very good dancers, Lana approved with satisfaction. Let me guess, something interferes with me, right? Yes. What does interfere you, Mark? Lana suddenly asked and stared at him with huge eyes full of reproach. Mark froze with surprise. Maybe the same as for you, Lana, 'cause the tango is danced by two, he answered, losing his confidence in the sense of what's going on. Really? And what it is, Mark, what troubles both of us? Would you like to hear it straight away from me? Mark asked, losing any explanation whatsoever. Let me guess. Looking for treasure, aren't you? How could I forget? Sarcastically shut out Lana, and the flash of resentment left without saying goodbye. All the rest evening, Mark tried to digest what happened. He was perfectly clear on her allusion. She suddenly decided to push him into a proposal. But what about the years of cowboy practice and mastering the feather? It all seemed pretty odd to Mark, especially since there's nothing more thankless than interpreting hints. The interpreter will always be left at his own fault for getting it wrong. Otherwise, tradition does not allow a woman to propose on her own. What else is there but a hint? In truth, Lana didn't even expect it of herself. It looks like the only one who could make sense of all of that till the end was the spirit maker. Champagne is instantly absorbed. The alcohol unexpectedly quickly slows down the most delicate and complex part of the brain, cortex. It's a hub of consciousness. General manager or film director or conductor, whatever. If a manager is out, the subordinates begin to wander around. Here it becomes clear who to whom is hooking up. In short, Lana fell head over heels in love. It means that one of the prime instincts, the gravitational center of all life, has kicked into full gear, and Lana got a desire, no matter what, but to make anew her own mark. She began to be literally torn apart. The main interest in her future favorite profession received a powerful competitors on behalf of the basic instinct of reproduction. Each of the interests tore the steering wheel onto itself, and Lana accordingly was getting motion by a shaky trail equidistant from both of them. And what was that road? Who even knows now? The next day, Mark called Lana with an apology in case there was something he didn't see or know, and with the hope to shed the light on all of those questions. In response, Lana also began to apologize with much regret for what had happened and tears in her eyes. And women's tears are the tsar's vodka for all questions. Later, Mark tried to talk about that, but Lana was evasive. And that was obvious. It wasn't easy for her to talk about that. In fact, Lana might not to hide anything from Mark, but neither did she know how to wriggle out of her conflicting wishes. She wanted and not wanted. At the same time, he answered, "Lana, you are my treasure." Time slowed its pace. Now Mark looked at watch more often and hoped to rush clock hands slowly creeping through the dense matter of ennui. Lana called seldom, and his ring steer no longer were enough to him. The talks were brief because the end of the semester was approaching and Lana worked at her articles very much. They couldn't see each other, so Mark dreamed of meeting like a screamer in the wilderness. When they eventually met, they disappeared into each other as if in a dream. These rare instants were so bright that they burned through Mark's mind as sunny spots of impressions, which then lingered in his memories for a long time. But now, it's only added his loneliness. Everything was changed after that very party, which left the questions with no answers. They shut Mark off from Lana with a big cold glass, and there was no way to pass through, to get closer, to feel. At times, Mark at all had wondered with a heaviness in his chest that probably Lana lost interest in him. The day stretched out like a tar, unwilling to split apart, and Mark waited with hope the end of a semester. One day, in the rush of exams, Lana made Mark happy with a phone call, inviting him to a restaurant like thunder out of the blue. To that same restaurant with the big window like the first time they met. It was a bit of a surprise to Mark, but he was already no strangers to it. Anyways, he was happy to finally meet her. But why in a restaurant? Somewhat mysterious. What if she wants to break up? Mark thought. With Lana, you gotta be ready for anything. Dress up like a James Bond. If she leaves me, I will remain handsome, at least in her memories. Mark was sitting at the table at the same window as the first date. There was a big basket of roses on the windowsill. Glasses of champagne sparkled with bubbles, and slightly mesmerized, Mark left them his aloof gaze. Hi. Lana stood to his right in a long black floor-length dress. Mark raised his eyes and, seeing her, instantly stood up. You are breathtaking. They sat at the table and looked at each other for almost a minute. It is for me? Lana broke the silence and pointed to the roses. It couldn't be otherwise. Thank you. Lana sighed, lowering her eyes for a second and then looked back at Mark again. I have a surprise for you too. Lana took a black velvet box out of her purse and placed it carefully in the middle of the table. Mark, I want to propose you, to get me married to you, she said, pushing him into the back of his chair with her tight gaze and opening the box. There on a white silk base were 2 engagement rings. Not less spectacular than in the shooting ring with the great peacemaker. As they say, a kind word and a gun are better than a kind word alone. Not for nothing did I get dressed as James Bond, thought Mark. He leaned back in his chair and nervously unbuttoned his bow tie, loosening a couple of buttons on his collar at once. You made me an offer I can't refuse, Mark affirmed with grim irony, quoting The Godfather. Mark couldn't hesitate to answer, and he flashed the phrase just to buy the time for thinking. If he agrees, and I love to, very much love to, that would be irresponsible and trash. Family is an affordable luxury for a humble student. If he refuses, which he wouldn't want to do very much as well, that would be to the utmost dignity. Lana didn't even know herself what he had to say to her. Anyways, she was ready to leave even if he hesitates a little to respond, as he had the last. And though, to be entirely frank, ought to be confessed that in case he agreed, she might herself have lost respect for him. Lana wanted neither and felt a kind of desperate helplessness. Her only hope of salvation was in him. She was always amazed by Mark when he found out of the box solutions where it seems to be impossible to come up with. She wished he could use his superpower this time as well, and would be able to find such a brilliant. After all, he is a prospector, isn't he? The instant flashed, and time was anxiously condensing. Lana sat half-turned, ready to get up and leave. Mark could not afford to let her go. He took the ring from the box and put it on his finger, watching Lana all the while. She continued to glare at him. I agree, proclaimed Mark. Lana eased her grip and braced out. But with the delay indefinite, Mark concluded. The promised diamond, despite Lana's expectations, offered no salvation. She couldn't go and stay at the same time like Schrodinger's cat. Time clenched into the firmness, did not allow that to unfold in space, and Lana, continuing to stare at Mark intently, responded. Now I'm happy, but somehow by half. For the other half, I'm unhappy. I'm afraid I'm going to be ripped apart. I better will be 100% unhappy with the whole. I'm sorry, Mark. It's very painful to me to say about that, but we can't continue see each other until your delay is over. Equal exchange, said Mark after a short pause. Mark realized that feelings arise and disappear on their own, and there's no switch for them anywhere. Time got unclenched. They took the glasses at the same time without word and instantly drained them to the bottom. The sparkling energy of champagne infused inside, relieving the ringing nerves and burst in a slight but pleasant dizziness. Lan, look, are you sure this will make you feel better? I personally would miss you terribly. And you? Lana took a worn-out pack of cigarettes from her purse and lit it up. Remember, you told me that all our feelings are only commands. That we can take control over them if picking up the proper antidote. You were right. I haven't smoked for almost a year. It's the first cigarette since we met. What if the love could be canned? Close it in a jar and put a canning agent in it so as not to hurt the feeling, nor to let it die. What if the strong love ends up so quickly because we knock it over whole glasses instead of straining it a little just to savor? Maybe if it spread in thin layer, it would be enough for a whole life. Mark was blown away by Lana's words, but looked at her with the eyes full of admiration, and it was as strange as it was fascinating. Maybe it's even possible that his natural curiosity might have prevailed, or his addiction to be with Lana at all costs. Maybe then he would be happy to see Lana, but not feel the pain of unbearable longing in her absence, and not jealous of her to the guns. Mark raised the glass and said with thoughtfulness in his voice, "Otto, close the gestalt." "A good gestalt is a closed gestalt," encouraged Lana with a smile. "Well, but if it's easier for you not to see me at all, how would you like to know about my decision? We can meet at the Archway the same day and time that we first saw each other." "But you are romantic," dropped Mark with zero black humor. "It seems like my treasure I already found. I wish you very much also find the one at the nearest time," said Lana and put her ring on.